News of Luther's activity reached Hungary shortly after he published his 95 Theses. Merchants from Hermannstadt likely learned of Luther's ideas at the Leipzig trade fair in 1519. One Thomas Preissner gave the first documented public reading of Luther's theses in Leibitz, currently Lubica, Slovakia, in 1521. In a year, the German townspeople were enthusiastically discussing Luther's view in the upper Hungarian mining towns. King Louis of Hungary's guardian, George Margrave of Brandenburg-Ansbach, entered into correspondence with Luther. Most German courtiers of Louis's wife, Mary of Habsburg, sympathized with the Protestant ideas, but she did not abandon her Roman Catholic faith. Her chaplain, Conrad Cordatus, made no secret of his adherence to the Lutheran theology, and she dismissed him after the Pope excommunicated Luther. The Königsrichter, Marcus Pfäfflinger, supported the spread of Lutheran ideas in Hermannstadt, where songs mocking the Papists or Roman Catholics gained popularity. The country's Hungarian or Slavic-speaking population had no direct access to Protestant literature for years. Most nobles were hostile toward Protestant ideas because they were convinced that Hungary could resist Ottoman invasions only with the Pope's support. Istvan or Bogzi, who represented Hungary at the Imperial Diet of Worms in 1521, entered into a public argument with Luther. Luther stated that the Hungarians should fight against their own sins rather than against the Ottomans, whom he regarded as God's scourge. The Hungarian noblemen were insulted, denying their self-declared mission as serving as the bulwark of Christianity. The first anti-Lutheran edict was proclaimed in Hungary on the 24th of April, 1523, and ordered the persecution and execution of all Lutherans and the confiscation of property. Ladislaus Zalgai, Archbishop of Esztergom, appointed commissioners to detect and destroy Lutheran literature, but the local magistrates obstructed them. Anti-Lutheran legislation could not be enforced during the civil war that followed the Battle of Mohacs. 6 of the 12 Hungarian bishops died on the battlefield. King Ferdinand appointed bishops to the vacant sees, but the Pope did not confirm them. Church property was unprotected, church buildings and monasteries were regularly sacked or expropriated. Neither king wanted to antagonize Protestant town leaders and aristocrats. Protestant preachers freely crossed the frontiers between Hungary and King Ferdinand's other realms. King John's most prominent supporters, mainly nationalist aristocrats, looked on Luther as a German innovator and remained unsympathetic towards him. John was a devout Roman Catholic, but he was unwilling to persecute so-called heretics after the Pope excommunicated him for his alliance with the Ottomans in 1529. Fear of social unrest hindered the spread of Protestant ideas, but no peasant movements followed the 1514 Peasant War, because the serfs easily exacted exemptions from their lords in the wake of the Ottoman expansion. Laymen played a preeminent role in the dissemination and reception of Protestant ideas. Both Luther's denial of priestly privileges and Zwingli's picture of the Reformation as a force transforming church and society alike endorsed participation from the people. The first Protestant evangelists were lay people of both sexes who preached outside church buildings. Both leaders of the town, with significant German population, were receptive to anti-Roman Catholic teaching. Pfäfflinger expelled the Roman Catholic parish priests and the Dominican friars from Hermannstadt around 1530. Some senior magistrates tried to impede the Reformation, but they could rarely find Roman Catholic priests to fill the vacant parishes. Town councils granted scholarships to young people for studies at Wittenberg and other academic centers of the Reformation, but professional Lutheran preachers were still rare. Some preachers' radicalism outraged the moderate townspeople. Wolfgang Schustel had to leave Bartfeld, currently Bardejov, Slovakia, for his strict views of public piety in 1531, and his successor, Isaias Lang, was expelled for his Anabaptist sympathies. A moderate magistrate, Johannes Honter, prevented the town pastor from abolishing the rules of fasting in Kronstadt in 1539. People who did not speak German became receptive to Protestant ideas in the 1530s. Protestant preachers compared the Hungarians suffering from Ottoman invasions with the Jews in the Egyptian and Babylonian captivities, describing the Hungarians as a new, chosen people, able to regain God's favor through demonstrating their faith. In contrast to this attractive explanation, Roman Catholic clerics emphasized that the Ottoman plight had been brought to the Hungarian people as a punishment for their sins. János Szilveszter, a graduate from the Krakow and Wittenberg universities, completed and published his Hungarian translation of the New Testament at Szarvár in 1541. Nadasdy was a representative figure of religious transition. He employed both a Lutheran chapel and a Roman Catholic court preacher. He offered asylum to Anabaptist refugees, but gave donations to the Paulician monks. He corresponded with both Melanchthon and the Pope, and his wife, Ursula Kenizai, regularly used Calvinist terminology in her correspondence with him. Protestant aristocrats ceded the village churches to the local Protestant congregations, thus transforming the originally Roman Catholic parishes to evangelical pastorages. Hungarians were exposed to Protestant ideas in a period of intensive debates among concurring Protestant denominations. Lutheran divine service first replaced Roman Catholic liturgy in eastern Hungary in Kronstadt in October 1542. The Saxons of Bistritz, currently Bistrita, Romania, destroyed the idols in their churches in late 1542 because they interpreted a Moldavian attack against the town as the sign of God's wrath for their idolatry. Johannes Hunter published a small book, the Reformation pamphlet, about the transformation of church life in Kronstadt. Not unlike other reformers, Hunter was convinced that the changes could not be regarded as innovations, but as steps towards the restoration of Western Christianity's ancient purity. He argued that many actually unimportant elements of Roman Catholic church life were alien to Orthodox travelers visiting Kronstadt, a flourishing commercial center on the Hungarian-Wallachian border, and their frequent demands for an explanation raised doubts about fundamental Christian doctrines in uneducated people. The most senior Saxon cleric, Matthias Ramser, sent a copy of Hunter's booklet to Luther, Mellington, and Johannes Bugenhagen for a review. 3 reviewers unanimously praised it for its clarity. Experiencing the government's unwillingness to take anti-Protestant measures, the Saxon leaders concluded that religious issues could be treated as each nation's internal affairs. In April 1544, religious issues were reconsidered at the Diet at Turda, or Turda, Romania, and the coexistence of the Roman Catholic and Lutheran denominations was basically recognized. A decree warned travelers to respect the devotional customs of the town or village where they were staying. The 3 nations' representative wanted to consolidate the religious status quo, and the Diet prohibited further religious innovations. In November, the Saxon nation's General Assembly ordered that all Saxon towns introduce Lutheran liturgy. The next year, the villages were to follow suit. Lutheran Reformation spread from Kronstadt to the nearby Szegely seats, primarily through the mediation of the town's Szegely guards and the 2 suburbs' Hungarian citizens. A Szegely aristocrat, Paul Daxo, was the Lutheran pastor's most influential protector in Szegely land. Some Szegely nobles remained devout Roman Catholics, like the Apor family, which secured the survival of Roman Catholic enclaves. The Saxon magistrates supported the publication of Lutheran catechisms in Romania. They proposed liturgical changes, but most Romanian Orthodox priests rejected them. Now, the spread of Calvinist theology and radical ideas disturbed both the Roman Catholic and Lutheran aristocrats and magistrates. In 1548, the Eastern Hungarian Diet repeated the ban on religious innovations, while the Diet of Royal Hungary outlawed the Sacramentarians and Anabaptists. At the latter Diet, the royal free boroughs were blamed for lenience with radical preachers. The Roman Catholic bishops set up commissions to expel all Protestants from Royal Hungary, but the royal free boroughs' immunities prevented the commissioners from launching investigations within their walls. Knowing that King Ferdinand had practically legalized the Augsburg Confession at the 1530 Imperial Diet, the Lutheran communities compiled confessions of faith to demonstrate their congregations' full compliance with it. Now, the Ottomans were indifferent to Christian theological debates, and Protestant ideas spread undisturbed in Ottoman Hungary. As the Ottoman authorities wanted to pacify the conquered territory, they were keen to maintain religious peace. They regulated the local Christian community's religious issues and letters of approval. They did not disturb the Christians' church life, but the construction and restoration of churches was strictly controlled, and the priests could not assemble to a synod without a special permission. According to contemporaneous reports, Ottoman officials favored Protestant pastors to Roman Catholic clergy, with some of them going as far as attending Protestant church services. In contrast, a Reformed pastor serving at Tolna, Palthuri Farkas, noted that Ottoman officials regularly investigated the local Christian views about Prophet Muhammad, and the Christians could avoid punishment only if they pretended ignorance. Now, the Eastern Hungarian Diet enacted the Saxon interpretation and declared religious issues as part of each nation's internal affairs in 1550. The Diet regularly urged Roman Catholics and Lutherans to receive each other with deference and friendliness. In 1551, Kolozsvár, now known as Cluj-Napoca, Romania, a free royal borough with a mixed Saxon and Hungarian population, met with no official opposition when the town council introduced Lutheranism. The unification of Royal Hungary and Eastern Hungary under the Habsburgs' rule provoked an Ottoman invasion in 1552. The Ottomans annexed the Banat, and refugees from the regions increased the Hungarian-speaking citizenry in Kolozsvár. The aristocrats' willingness to expand their privileges and Ottoman expansion created favorable circumstances for the reception of Calvinist theology. Nobles started to regard the right to choose between concurring Christian denominations as an important element of their liberties. Bullinger addressed his Brevis et Pia Institutio to the Hungarians, praising them for their struggle against the Ottomans. His work gained popularity, facilitating the spread of his theological views. Tensions between concurring Protestant ideologies intensified, and public theological debates were regularly held. Political scene was now quickly changing. When Ferdinand withdrew his mercenaries from Transylvania, Bornemisza left his diocese and the Transylvanian bishopric was left vacant. In 1556, the Diet elected Petrovics as vice-regent to govern the country until the return of Queen Isabella and John Sigismund. During the interregnum, Petrovics initiated a religious debate between Lutheran and Calvinist preachers in Kolozsvár. The three nations' delegates celebrated the Queen and her son's return with much pomp in October 1556. The Diet secularized all properties of the bishoprics of Transylvania and Varad. The Queen strove for religious peace, and the Diet decreed that everyone might hold the faith of his choice, together with the new rites or the older ones, without offense to any. The wording is misleading because the decree did not enact religious tolerance, but promoted the peaceful cohabitation of Roman Catholics and Lutherans. In practice, the Roman Catholic priests' free movement was limited to Roman Catholic aristocrats' domains. In 1557, the Lutheran pastors held a synod and divided the Transylvanian church district along ethnic lines. Ferenc David, Kolozsvár's popular town pastor, was elected the Hungarian district's first superintendent. Around 1557, his studies of Zwinglian theology weakened his Lutheran conviction, but he eagerly defended traditional Christology against Stancaro. Religious discussions continued. In June 1557, the two Transylvanian church districts' joint synod completed a common confessional document, the Kolozsvár Consensus. It mirrored Luther's views on the Eucharist, but in September the Protestant pastors of Partium adopted the Calvinist formula. The Saxon priest sent a copy of the Kolozsvár Consensus for a review to Melanchthon. The next Diet incorporated Melanchthon's assessment in a decree and outlawed sacramentarians, but the ban could not stop the development of Calvinist theology. Szegedi's student, Peter Melius Juhász, completed the first Eucharistic creed in Hungarian. He defined the Eucharist as a symbolic commemoration of Christ's death in line with Reformed theology. He convinced David to attend the synod of the Calvinist clerics of Partium in Varad in August 1559. As the synod adopted the Calvinist creed with David's consent, David's rupture with the Lutheran Church was inevitable, and he abdicated the superintendency. In November, Hungarian pastors from Upper Hungary, Partium, and Transylvania assembled at a joint synod in Marosvásárhelyi, now Târgu Mureș in Romania, and adopted Melius's creed. The German townspeople remained hostile towards Calvinism, and 7 Upper Hungarian mining towns adopted a common Lutheran confession of faith, the Confessio Heptapolitana. Sometimes the local lord's patronage right was inadequate to stop the spread of Calvinist ideas. Archbishop Nicolaus Olahus founded a seminary for the education of the Roman Catholic clergy in Nagy Zsombat in 1560. Next year, he established a Jesuit convent, which developed into the Counter-Reformation's principal center in Royal Hungary. Olahus tried to implement a ban against priests who would not receive the holy orders from a Roman Catholic bishop, but they were numerous and their congregations was unwilling to dismiss them. His action raised the Protestants' animosity towards Roman Catholic Church authorities. King Ferdinand supported the Roman Catholic renewal, but John Sigismund adopted an open-minded approach in religious issues. After a series of debates between the Saxon Lutheran and the predominantly Hungarian Calvinist pastors, he persuaded both parties to summarize their views in 2 separate documents, and sent both summaries to German Protestant theologians for a review in 1562. The same year, he converted from Roman Catholicism to Lutheranism, but he did not end any further religious debates. A decisive debate was held at Nagyenjed, now Aiud, Romania, in 1564. John Sigismund's anti-Trinitarian physician Giorgio Biandrata, who represented him at the meeting, advanced the election of 2 separate superintendents before the discussion started, making the separation of the Lutheran and Calvinist churches practically inevitable. Calvinist priests chose David. On the 4th of June, 1564, the Diet of Torda sanctioned the existence of the Calvinist Church as the 3rd legally acknowledged denomination in eastern Hungary. And the same year, John Sigismund converted to Calvinism. Now, although 2 Calvinist leaders, David and Heltai, were of Saxon origin, it was mostly ethnic Hungarians who chose to adhere to the Calvinist Church. The two Protestant denominations initially had no separate church organizations. The predominantly Calvinist Church of Kolyvar held jurisdiction over the counties, including the local Lutheran congregations, while the primarily Lutheran Church of Hermannstadt also included Calvinist congregations in the Saxon seats. To promote the Romanians' conversion to Calvinism, John Sigismund appointed a Protestant Romanian priest, Gheorghe of Sin Gheorghiu, as their sole religious leader in 1566. The Diet ordered the expulsion of all Orthodox priests who refused to convert to Calvinism, but this was never implemented. John Sigismund's religious policy was unique in contemporaneous Europe. By the end of his reign, 4 legally acknowledged religions coexisted in his realm. Roman Catholic communities survived primarily in Jagellonland and Partium. The Saxons remained staunch supporters of the Lutheran Church. Most Hungarians and Jagellis adhered to Calvinism or Unitarianism. Each acknowledged religion was supported by privileged groups, the leaders of the Hungarian, Saxon, or Jagelli nations, or the magistrates of the wealthy Kolyvar. Religious tolerance diminished the risk of confessional conflicts that could have been fateful to John Sigismund's new state. Social radicalism was not tolerated, however. When a Polish pastor, Elias Gizmideli, proposed the establishment of a communitarian, egalitarian, and pacifist congregation at Kolyvar, David achieved his dismissal. The peasantry of the Partium was influenced by the radical Anabaptist ideas. A charismatic Romanian serf, Gheorghe Crăciun, gathered a peasant army to establish the kingdom of God on earth in 1570, and he led the armed peasantry against Debrecen, but Melius repelled the attack. The Habsburg kings of Royal Hungary did not tolerate Calvinist and anti-Trinitarian ideas. They regularly issued edicts against sacramentarians in the 1560s and 1570s. The royal free boroughs and the nobility of the western counties remained staunch supporters of Lutheran theology. In contrast, aristocrats whose domains were located in the eastern counties employed reformed priests and promoted conversions of the local peasantry to Calvinism. King Maximilian followed a more conciliatory religious policy than his father. Lazarus von Schwendi, who was one of his principal advisors, regarded religious tolerance as a precondition for the consolidation of the Habsburg Empire. Maximilian's tolerant policy was sharply criticized by his brother, Archduke Ferdinand. The spread of Protestantism did not put an end to the Roman Catholic Church's privileged position in Royal Hungary. The Roman Catholic archbishops and bishops retained their seats in the upper chamber of the Diet, and the Habsburg kings appointed their chancellors from among the Roman Catholic prelates. A Roman Catholic aristocrat's election indicates that the predominantly Protestant three nations regarded their denomination's position as secure. He wanted Stephen Bathory, the Roman Catholic successor to John Sigismund, wanted to improve the Roman Catholic Church's position. Although he could not regulate religious issues without the Diet's consent, he could take advantage of the theological conflicts and exploit the instability of the Protestant denomination's church organization. He claimed the right to appoint the Lutheran superintendents from among 3 candidates proposed by the Saxon clergy, and demanded the standardization of Lutheran liturgy among the lines of the most conservative ceremonies. He went so far that he tried to persuade the Lutheran pastors to condemn their Calvinist and Unitarian peers for heresy, in clear contradiction to laws prohibiting attacks on priests and theological grounds. The Saxon priests resisted almost all of his demands, and they were willing only to declare their adherence to the Augsburg Confession. Now he was more successful in putting an end to the Romanians' enforced conversion to Calvinism. He restored the Orthodox Church hierarchy and appointed a Moldavian monk, Eftimi, to head it. The Serbian Patriarch Macarie ordered Eftimi bishop in April 1572. Pockets of reformed Romanian communities survived in the estates of Calvinist aristocrats, mainly in southwestern Transylvania. Bathory could suppress anti-Trinitarian teaching in settlements with a religiously mixed population by exercising his patronage rights. King Rudolf, who succeeded his father in Royal Hungary, abandoned Maximilian's tolerant policy and did not hide his favoritism towards Roman Catholics. Stephen Bathory persuaded the Diet to allow the Jesuits to settle in 1579 in Transylvania. 2 years later, he established a university for them in Kolyvar. The first Jesuits came from Italy and Poland, and although the Diet banned them from pursuing missionary work, they started to recruit among young Hungarian noblemen. The radicalism of some anti-Trinitarian intellectuals worried Stephen Bathory, and he achieved a ban on further religious innovations at the Diet in May 1572. The Diet authorized him to start investigations against suspected innovators together with a superintendent before the Compton Church Authority. Without a superintendent's cooperation, state authorities were helpless against religious radicals. When 3 young anti-Trinitarian students challenged the doctrine of the immortality of the soul, Ferenc David refused to initiate an investigation against them. David remained open towards radical ideologies, and the Diet restricted the anti-Trinitarian preachers' right to hold synods to Kolozsvár and Torda. In the 1570s, most leading figures of radical anti-Trinitarianism visited Transylvania. The former Dominican Jacob Palaiologos, who rejected the doctrine of original sin and opposed the adoration of Christ, stayed in Transylvania from 1573 to 1575. The German Matthias Vichi came in 1578. He emphasized that the faithful should live in accordance with the law of Moses as set in the Old Testament. David did not strive for the adoption of Jewish rituals, but he condemned the invocation of Christ, which he associated with polytheism. David's rejection of the adoration of Christ outraged moderate anti-Trinitarians. Giorgio Bandrata invited the prominent anti-Trinitarian theologian Fausto Sozzini to Kolozsvár to dissuade David from radicalism. After a synod approved David's position about Jesus, Bandrata approached Stephen Bathory's brother and lieutenant Christopher Bathory, persuading him to order David's arrest for religious innovations in March 1579. David was found guilty at the Diet and died in the dungeon of Deva Castle. Bandrata's candidate, Demeter Hunyadi, succeeded him as the new Unitarian superintendent. Hunyadi completed a confession of faith that reflected Sozzini's moderate theology. After a Unitarian synod accepted that document in early 1580, Hunyadi dismissed all pastors who rejected Christ's adoration, but radical noblemen continued to employ non-adorationist priests. Shigeli communities became open to radical anti-Trinitarianism during the Roman Catholic Bathory's reign. The Shigeli aristocrat Andres Aosi, who accepted Vehi's theology in the 1580s, was regarded as the founder of Shigeli Sabbatarianism. The Sabbatarians obeyed all of Moses' laws, distinguishing themselves from Gerendi and the followers who keep them selectively. In 1588, the Transylvanian Diet persuaded the young Sigismund Bathory to expel the Jesuits from Transylvania in return for declaring him to be of age. Bathory's favoritism towards Roman Catholics was obvious, and ambitious young Protestant aristocrats converted to Roman Catholicism during his reign. Pope Sixtus V appointed the Jesuit Alfonso Carrillo to represent him in the Transylvanian court, and Carrillo became one of Bathory's most trusted advisors. Bathory purged the aristocrats who opposed his anti-Ottoman policy. Many of the executed noblemen were Unitarian, and their relatives were often required to convert to Roman Catholicism to receive a pardon. The Jesuits could return to Transylvania, and the prince allowed the Roman Catholic bishop of Transylvania, Demeter Mnapraigi, to move to the old episcopal palace in Gyula-Fehérvár. In April 1595, the Diet did not only repeal the ban on religious innovations, but also ordered the heads of the counties and seats to persecute those who did not adhere to one of the 4 received denominations. In 1603, King Rudolf announced that he was determined to exterminate the godless heresy. Claiming the right of patronage over churches and royal free boroughs, he forced the predominantly Lutheran townspeople of Kassa, now Košice, Slovakia, to cede their main church to the Roman Catholics. The Protestant delegates protested against this action at the Diet, but the king arbitrarily supplemented the laws passed at the Diet with a clause ordering the persecution of heretics. A decree prohibited the discussion of religious issues at the Diet in 1604. During the negotiations between Bocskai and the royal court, the Roman Catholic clerics strove for the enactment of the inviolability of the Roman Catholic Church's privileges in return for acknowledging the legal status of the Lutheran and Calvinist churches. Instead, the Diet passed laws confirming the nobles' right to religious freedom and extending it to the free royal boroughs, to the market towns in the royal domain, and to soldiery of the border fortresses. The Diet established the jurisdiction of county courts to make judgment in disputes over tithes, authorized the Lutheran and Calvinist senior clergy to pursue parish visitation, and the titular bishops lost their seats in the upper house. Now, by 1600, more than 75% of the population in Hungary was Protestant. The Roman Catholic Church had lost around 90% of its adherents. The Reformation laid the foundation of the use of native languages in scholarly debates and brought about the first golden age of vernacular culture for the kingdom's most ethnic groups. The Vibiro completed the first study of the Hungarian language in 1538. Sylvester's translation of the New Testament was the first Hungarian book printed in Hungary. Lutheran Catechism was published in Slovakian in Bartfeld in 1581. Lutheran Slovakian pastors adopted a version of the Czech language for liturgical use, especially because many of them regarded the Czech Hussites as their forefathers. Protestants and Roman Catholics alike attributed particular importance to education. The town council gained control of the parish schools in the Protestant towns. They established school authorities to oversee teaching programs and relationships between teachers, school children, and parents, and appointed the town pastor to head it. Although individual teaching programs and school regulations were compiled, they all followed patterns adopted from educational centers of Protestant Europe. The earliest school regulation was compiled by Stockel at Bartfeld in 1540. Basic education included the study of catechism. The town school offered the opportunity to learn to read, write, and count. Humanities were taught at high schools or gymnasia, and only those who wanted to study at university were required to learn theology. Protestant aristocrats established schools on their domains, and in response, the Catholic Synod ordered the establishment of elementary schools in each rural parish in 1560.